Bloodshed, terror, and destruction. Those are three words that highlight the ongoing war of the Tren de Aragua gang with Clan del Golfo. In recent weeks, the violence has escalated, spiraling beyond any point of control. This is, of course, the result of allegations of election fraud by the controversial Venezuelan president, Nicolás Maduro. Both of these violent, illegal gangs have increased the violence and turned up the heat even further, causing things to quickly reach a boiling point. The leader of Tren del Llano, alias Oscar del Llano, has reportedly ordered the recruitment and arming of locals, adding to the fear and instability. But now, the chaos is no longer confined to Venezuela and is spilling out into Colombia as well. The government is trying to fight both of these powerful gangs, but quickly losing the battle, and innocent civilians are losing their lives in the process. This gang war is destabilizing Colombia on every level, and unfortunately, only allowing these gangs to grow and become even more powerful. With no end to the fighting in sight, the future looks grim, and the prospect of peace seems unlikely. The background of El Tren de Aragua. Let's take a look back at how this entire debacle began. El Tren de Aragua is one of Latin America's most violent and disruptive criminal organizations. This gang originated in Venezuela, with its operations centered in the Tocaron prison in the state of Aragua. Hector Rustenford Guerrero Flores is the infamous leader of this gang. Better known as El Nino, he emerged as the notorious head of El Tren de Aragua back in 2012. He used violence and corruption to gain control of the Tocaron prison. Before long, corruption led the prison to become more like a resort, complete with luxurious amenities like restaurants, swimming pools, and even a zoo. All of this, of course, was controlled by the gang. Over the years, El Tren de Aragua's criminal activities have expanded beyond Venezuela to include everything from human trafficking to extortion, murder, and the smuggling of massive amounts of weapons and drugs. This gang is infamous for its brutal methods to maintain control, using extreme violence to dominate local gangs and take possession of the drug trade. One of the primary ways they do this is by exploiting the trade routes that were previously used by migrants to travel to other countries. The rivals of Tren de Aragua, Tren del Llano. One of the most infamous rivals of Tren de Aragua is, of course, Tren del Llano. The Tren del Llano is another criminal organization based in Venezuela. It is primarily known for its criminal operations in the Llanos region, which includes the states of Apure and Guárico. Similarly to Tren de Aragua, Tren del Llano also got its start as a prison gang and quickly expanded and grew in power.
Estamos aquí al frente para apoyar al pueblo. No queremos el que genere violencia con la población. Vamos a contraatacar con todo lo que tenemos hacia ellos porque el pueblo se respeta.
Today, it is known for its hierarchical style of leadership structure, which allows it to maintain control over its criminal enterprises and territories. It often uses violence and intimidation to maintain its dominance and suppress its rivals. The way that Tren de Aragua has managed to expand so far out of control is based largely on the fact that Venezuela as a nation is struggling economically. The fact that it is also experiencing poor leadership and extensive corruption only added to its vulnerability as it has become completely ransacked by criminal activity.
In today's video, we're diving into the escalating crisis in Venezuela, where the lines between criminal gangs, political games, and everyday people caught in the chaos are getting seriously blurred. The country is facing a massive spike in violence, with groups like Tren del Llano and Tren de Aragua taking center stage.
As Venezuela continues to suffer from a lack of law enforcement, Tren del Llano only continues to cause greater terror and destruction as it struggles to maintain control and dominate other criminal organizations. Those that are forced to suffer the most are, of course, the people of Venezuela who live in fear due to the constant violence and instability. As the power struggle continues, it is causing major issues, not just in Venezuela, but in Colombia and throughout the United States as well. The rivals of Tren de Aragua, Clan del Golfo. As you might imagine, a criminal gang as massive and notorious as Tren de Aragua has more than just one major rival. Aside from Tren del Llano, one of the gang's other greatest enemies, who is at the center of the ongoing war, is Clan del Golfo, or the Gulf Clan. It's also known as the Gaitanista Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, AGC. Clan del Golfo originated from right-wing paramilitary groups in Colombia and is now the single largest distributor of cocaine globally, exporting up to 20 tons of cocaine each month.
One afternoon's work moving these kilos will pay him the same as a legal job in 1 year. With so much money and power to be had, he can't see the drug war ever ending.
This cartel has developed autonomy from Mexican cartels by controlling distribution routes into Europe directly, particularly through countries like the Netherlands. The cartel's operations are rooted in military tactics, with its members often wearing military uniforms and behaving like a disciplined army. The cartel controls towns and regions in Colombia, where they have even enforced shutdowns of entire cities, assassinating business owners who did not comply. With an estimated 6,000 members, nearly all armed, the cartel's structure and military background have enabled it to maintain significant control and avoid internal conflict, unlike earlier cartels such as Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel. Clan del Golfo's ruthless leadership. The Gulf Clan was originally led by Dairo Antonio Usuga David, better known as Otoniel. Otoniel is nothing short of a real-life monster, and under his leadership, the cartel was involved in various brutal activities, including campaigns of child sexual abuse and rape. Otoniel had a deep fascination with witchcraft and strange rituals, and it was him who chose to use a decentralized cell structure to manage the cartel. This is one of the main ways that he managed to avoid the group from internal disagreements that could have put the whole cartel in jeopardy. Just a few of the crimes on Otoniel's massive rap sheet include sending dozens of shipments of cocaine to the United States, murdering law enforcement officers, recruiting minors, and inflicting horrific abuse on children.
What we've heard about the operation is that it was underway and being planned for several months before it took place. Certainly, this is a person that Colombian military intelligence would have been looking for really for years. We're talking about an individual who has had a leading role in the drug trade and in armed criminal activity for decades.
He was public enemy number one for over a decade, as both Colombian and United States officials sought his capture. There was even a $5 million reward posted for information that would lead to his arrest. Otoniel was finally arrested in October of 2021 and extradited to the United States. At the time, there were 132 warrants out for his arrest.
Colombia's president says Dairo Antonio Usuga, also known as Otoniel, was captured in a meticulous operation. He was highly sought in the United States. Washington describes him as a leader of an armed and violent drug cartel. It had put up a $5 million reward to help locate him.
The drug kingpin ultimately pled guilty to the massive amount of charges against him and was sentenced to 45 years behind bars. This is a sentence that is currently serving out at ADX Florence, a maximum security prison located in Florence, Colorado. But even with Otoniel behind bars, the cartel continues to operate under new leadership, maintaining its position as a dominant force in the global cocaine trade. The effect of recent political events on the cartel violence. So you may be wondering, the cartels have been around for quite some time. Why are things getting so much worse recently? Well, the result of the increase in violence can partially be tied to recent political events and controversial political figures. In particular, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro.
The U.S. has discussed pardons for Maduro and top lieutenants of his who faced Justice Department indictments, said three people familiar with the Biden administration deliberation. The Washington Post reports, quote, rather than taking the lead in pushing for Maduro to step down and threatening sanctions and other reprisals if he refuses, as the White House has done in the past, the current administration has placed its hopes in a triad of leftist American, Latin American governments to persuade him to yield. So far, efforts of the presidents of Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil, all of whom have relatively stable relations with Maduro, appear to have achieved little.
The way that President Maduro has chosen to run the nation has angered many, including gangs. Tren de Aragua and Tren del Llano in particular have been outspoken recently, in the condemnation of Maduro and have even threatened the fact that they are unwilling to maintain a truce with Maduro if change doesn't take place and their demands are not met. This discontent that the gangs have with Maduro right now is complicated. Venezuela's economy has significantly deteriorated under Maduro. This has affected a lot of different areas, including the illegal activity of the gangs. Some criminal groups might also oppose Maduro not out of ideological differences, but as a strategy. They may plan to try to enhance their own power or to align with other political forces that promise them more benefits or autonomy that Maduro is either unable or unwilling to provide. Not only that, but Maduro's reign has been absolutely filled with controversy and criminal allegations. His administration has been accused of human rights violations, including torture, arbitrary detentions, extrajudicial killings, and suppressing freedom of speech and assembly. The Maduro administration is perceived as highly corrupt, with allegations of extensive mismanagement, particularly in the handling of the country's oil wealth. All of these things combined has led to an even greater fight over power, resources, and wealth, with the criminal gangs promising retaliation in response. The terror in Bogota reaches a new level. Meanwhile, in recent weeks, the people of Bogota, Colombia, have been in the midst of a living nightmare as the violence has reached a fever pitch and made it nearly impossible to live out their day-to-day lives without terror. From the early hours of the morning, the streets of Bogota witness chaos and violence as the Clan del Golfo and its allies engage in conflicts. According to recent reports, the group uses graffiti and public displays of banners as a means of marking their territory and instilling fear among the local population. One recent incident involved the placement of a Clan del Golfo banner on the pedestrian bridge at the Suba Transversal 91 station. This particular placement of the banner is not just symbolic, it is a bold and obvious signal of the clan's plan to establish control and dominance over certain areas. The Clan del Golfo works with local criminal groups like Los Paisas to strengthen their hold over the city. These alliances are strategic. The goal is to expand their power and extend their criminal activities, which include extortion, threats, and direct acts of violence. The Gulf Cartel is particularly fond of using graffiti not only to mark their territory, but to communicate threats and conserve the group's image of power. When rival cartels enter an area of town, it will be impossible for them to miss the Gulf Cartel spray painted on every building and splattered onto every street corner. The group has also been known to adapt their operational strategies to the urban environment of Bogota. Unlike their rural operations, which most of the time focus more on direct control through violence and coercion, in the city, their tactics are different. There is more of a focus on forming alliances that can help them navigate and eventually dominate the urban criminal landscape.
What it shows is the inability of the local and national government to manage security policies properly, and it shows that nobody prepared for a wave of crime so strong as the one we're dealing with.
This strategic shift is super important not only for their survival, but their growth and expansion, especially if they aim to overpower Tren de Aragua, which is currently considered the most significant threat to their goals for the future. The disputes between these groups often escalate to public and violent confrontations, particularly during the night or the very early morning hours. Can you imagine living somewhere where the sound of weapons firing and the sight of armed men walking around your neighborhood streets are just common, everyday occurrences? That is what life has become in Bogota and surrounding areas as a result of this war. The sense of insecurity among residents has only continued to become more and more of an issue, with some feeling as if they have no choice but to flee the area for the sake of their lives and the lives of their family members. An attempt to regain control in Bogota, a near impossible feat. A major issue at hand here is the law enforcement, or rather, lack of good law enforcement, that are capable of keeping up with the violence and maintain some sense of control and order. Law enforcement, while present, often arrive too late after incidents have occurred. In many cases, it seems that they underestimate the severity of what's going on, or don't realize that their inability to arrive in a timely manner is quite literally resulting in countless innocent lives being lost. As you can imagine, the residents are frustrated and angry. This has led to public outcry and criticism of the law enforcement's effectiveness in handling such organized crime threats, and yet nothing seems to change. The influence of the Clan del Golfo is not limited to just physical violence and visible markings. They also engage in extortion schemes that target local businesses. These businesses are basically forced into paying regular sums of money to the cartel in order to avoid violence or disruption. This is a common tactic used by many organized crime groups to fund their operations and strengthen their economic base. It can be absolutely debilitating for small business owners to try to keep up with paying these fees, but it's not like they actually have a choice. If they fail to comply, it could mean the end of the business and their livelihood, or even worse, they could find themselves facing the wrath of the cartel, which could result in more violence and even death. In some cases, business owners receive threatening calls and messages, demanding compliance and warning of consequences for non-cooperation. For many of them, it is not worth it to try to go against the cartel, not when there is so much at stake and their very lives could be jeopardy. In their public communications and interactions with the media, local law enforcement continues to claim that there is no substantial presence of the Clan del Golfo in Bogota. They argue that many of the activities thought to be connected to the clan might actually be the work of other groups impersonating them to try to capitalize on their notorious reputation. But local Bogota residents know that this is a lie. After all, they see the violence and have firsthand experienced what the presence of this group has done to their community. The evidence of the clan's activities and influence, as reported by local witnesses, and everything that has been seen through the ongoing violence and intimidation tactics, completely contradicts law enforcement's claims. This complicated and confusing web of criminal alliances, rivalries, and violent confrontations continues to be a growing challenge for Bogota's security forces. The road ahead is guaranteed to be filled with challenge after challenge for the city's law enforcement. They don't only have to try to attempt to handle the immediate threats, but to somehow dismantle the deeper network of criminal influence that groups like the Clan del Golfo have had upon urban life. The living nightmare of Bogota business owners as the cartel war wages on. Let's take a closer look at what the day-to-day lives look like for Bogota small business owners as the cartel war rages on, and Clan del Golfo, as well as Tren de Aragua, continue their reign of terror on these innocent people. Pamphlets, threatening phone calls, terrifying, disturbing, and violent videos. These are all things that are a part of the daily life for Bogota business owners, and they are all ways that the Gulf Cartel attempts to intimidate and control them. The daily lives of these business owners are plagued by fear as they are constantly targeted by criminal gangs who demand money through extortion. The merchants face a tough choice: either close their businesses and lose their livelihoods, or defend their property with everything they have, even if it means resorting to violence themselves. To speak out publicly about the ongoing corruption and terror in Bogota as a result of these cartels could make someone the next target of the cartel's rage. But some merchants have gone to the press and spoken out anonymously about the issues they're facing and the day-to-day threats that they're receiving. One small business owner says that he was contacted by the cartel through a phone call he received. Somehow, the caller, who identified himself as a leader of the Tren de Aragua cartel, knew not only the man's name and personal information, but information about his business. The caller spoke to the man over the phone for 15 to 30 minutes, and the phone call was filled with threat after threat. The caller threatened violence, telling him that it would be better for him to dig a grave because if he didn't comply with the orders of the cartel, he would die a brutal and grisly death. This particular business owner is not the only local resident who has received these threats, but there are some that have not taken these threats seriously and only to later pay the price, sometimes suffering lethal consequences when the cartel comes back to retaliate if their demands are not met. It's truly as if many of these merchants, out of fear for their lives and the safety of their employees, are living in an active war zone and have to prepare themselves accordingly. they have decided to protect themselves by wearing bulletproof vests and arming themselves with firearms. The tension has escalated to an even more terrifying level now that it has been revealed that the criminals are often fully aware of who is armed and who's not. Theft is supposedly aware of where they are at all times. Another merchant shared a tense moment where he was warned that some members of the gang were waiting for him at the corner and demanded that he pay them. In a state of absolute terror and panic, the merchant decided to drive straight to a gas station where he had to draw his weapon as a motorcycle approached him. As insane as this sounds, that is how dangerous and unpredictable these situations have become. There has been another recent report by the media that tells the story of two merchants, one who has been running a butcher shop for over 20 years and another who has been in the spare parts business for about 15 years. Both of these men, along with their employees, have been forced to take up arms in response to the relentless threats and intimidation from different criminal gangs operating in Bogota. The situation is becoming more and more dire as these business owners find themselves in a constant state of fear. They are not just terrified for their own lives, but also for the lives of their workers and families. There seems to be no escape from this nightmare. That man who came forward and told the media about that threatening phone call he received from the leader of Tren de Aragua says that just days after that terrifying incident, he also received another phone call from a leader of a different cartel. While the name of that cartel isn't revealed, we can imagine that it is most likely Clan del Golfo or possibly Tren del Llano. Over the phone, the caller from this new gang demanded that this merchant help them as well, warning him that they knew he was armed and wore a bulletproof vest, but that this wouldn't protect him from their wrath. The gang member ended up being true to his word and followed through on the threats he made against this poor merchant, because, as the merchant then revealed, just about a month after he received this call, a violent attack was carried out against one of his own employees. A motorcycle passed by the business and opened fire, leaving the merchant and his workers terrified. Many of the employees, out of fear, chose not to return to work. Meanwhile, others resigned themselves to the fact that they might not survive if they continue working for this business. But what is the alternative? For some, leaving this job would put them in a position when they are unable to make ends meet or even put food on the tables for their families. It's clearly a lose-lose situation. The emotional toll these events have taken on the merchants is absolutely heartbreaking and indescribable. One business owner mentioned how some of his workers, who had been with him for many years, could no longer bear the fear and left the job. He wasn't angry and didn't feel betrayed by their decision to leave. It was a decision he understood but couldn't do anything about. However, others stayed, resigned to their fate, and told the merchant that if anything happened to them, he should take care of their children. This shows how deep the sense of loyalty and camaraderie among the workers really is, despite the dangerous circumstances they face daily. The cruel mind games of the cartel. The cartels are good at playing mind games with their victims and using this manipulation to try to maintain control over them. Sometimes, this involves sending merchants gruesome pictures showing people being tortured or killed. They send these pictures to business owners to try to show that they're not messing around and that they mean business. The whole goal here is, of course, to get these innocent people to continue paying their extortion fees. But what a lot of the people who are receiving these graphic images don't realize is that a lot of the time, the truth of these images is often misconstrued by the people sending them. For example, the cartel will try to take credit for whatever horrible violence is happening in the image, but in many cases, these are old pictures and they portray incidents that those sending them had nothing to do with. Despite the efforts of law enforcement to try to take back control, Most merchants in the area continue to live in fear, especially in certain areas of Bogota, where the criminal gang's influence is particularly strong. They are forced to exercise extreme caution and are very aware that at any given minute, they may find themselves in a situation where they will have to fight for their lives. To flee or to fight. There is frustration, there is anger, and there is no shortage of terror. Many business owners want to leave and escape the violence, but say that they have nowhere to go. Many don't have formal education and believe that it would be difficult for them to pick up and try to start over elsewhere if they leave their business behind. Despite these overwhelming challenges and the heartbreaking desperation of the situation, many of these residents have made the difficult decision to continue to fight. They meet regularly to discuss how they can reinforce their security measures. They do what they can to protect their businesses and try to maintain some semblance of peace in their communities. But at the end of the day, they also acknowledge the reality that no matter how prepared they are, if their time comes, there may be nothing they can do to stop it. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.